Well over 100 organizations have written to Congress asking them to support this Yemen War Powers resolution.
If you use that same kilowatt hour of renewables to produce hydrogen, and then you replace your gas with that hydrogen, you're getting a much smaller result in terms of saving carbon emissions, as is illustrated by that small grey blob down the bottom.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. I want to show off a new tool that will let you get to our different sites easily. The site is Linktree. To go to it, you type linktr.ee/go-the-struggle. That will bring you to this page where you can get to many of our features with a single click. Remember, it's not a .org, it's a .ee. And to a new archive of articles on our website called Israel Against Jews, which talks about how Israel discriminates against those Jews who are not religiously orthodox. And that means most Jews in the world. At the top of the archive now is an article by a rather conservative writer for Haaretz, who nevertheless explains that the incoming rulers of Israel basically hold diaspora Jews in contempt. Diaspora is a word used by Zionists to mean those second-class Jews who don't live in Israel. Leila Al-Arian reports that YouTube has age-restricted the video "The Killing of Shireen Abu-Akleh." That means it can't be viewed by people under 18 and everyone not signed into an account. She retweets that it is her understanding that some in Israel organize to massively complain against any video about Israel that they don't like, hoping that YouTube will restrict it or ban it. You can still see the video, and we highly recommend you see the Al Jazeera video, "The Killing of Shireen Abu-Akleh." Now, an interview about a legislative move that seemed to offer great hope, but was withdrawn for unknown reasons. The idea was to use a war powers resolution to end the war against Yemen, which is a national grassroots advocacy organization. And we're going to talk about the latest effort of activists to stop U.S. aid for the Saudi war on Yemen. Good morning.
Good morning.
So as I understand it, the idea was to use the war powers resolution to stop U.S. aid for that war. Could you remind our viewers of the powers of this war powers resolution? What was it designed to do?
Well, first of all, the Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution says that Congress, not the president, has the power to declare war. And we've seen a pattern where president after president has entered conflicts around the world, bombing other countries, ground troops, these wars that Congress never authorized. The 1973 War Powers Act reiterated the Constitution and provided a means for members of Congress to call the question on U.S. participation in conflicts around the world that they had not authorized. And the War Powers, and that 1973 War Powers Act says that any member of Congress can introduce a resolution to the floor of the United States House of Representatives or the United States Senate to call the question. And it bypasses the normal committee structure where you have where bills will get stuck in committees. It's said to be privileged, meaning that any member of Congress can move this forward. And that's exactly what members of Congress have done recently. This past spring and summer, Representative DeFazio in the House of Representatives and Senator Sanders in the Senate introduced a joint war powers resolution.
So there was also a lot of organizations behind this. It wasn't just something that the people in Congress thought of.
Well over 100 organizations have written to Congress asking them to support this Yemen War Powers resolution. And that's just national organizations, plus all of the local and statewide organizations from around the country that have supported. This has been an effort that's been going on for years. It was in large part because of grassroots activists that we got the Yemen War Powers resolution passed through the Senate in 2018, through a Republican-controlled Senate, and then through a divided Congress in the spring of 2019. What's interesting about this is that a number of conservative organizations, as well as a number of progressive organizations, have been supporting this Yemen War Powers resolution. I mean, just in the last few days, we're seeing statements and calls to action from Code Pink for Peace. We're also seeing organizations like that and Just Foreign Policy, Demand Progress. And you're also seeing calls from the Americans for Progress, from the Cato Institute, and these conservative organizations, many conservative organizations, the Libertarian Party. I mean, you see this more conservative effort too, because it turns out that there are a lot of people who care about the Constitution and what it says. And there are a lot of people who also care about U.S. resources and that they shouldn't be being used to starve people to death in other countries.
All right. So last night was supposed to be a procedural vote on this resolution, but there was a big development. What happened?
Yes. So Bernie Sanders went to the floor of the U.S. Senate, and he said that he was withdrawing his request for a vote, that he had received communications from the administration that they wanted to sit down and talk and work with his office to come up with something that they could all agree to.
How do you feel about that?
It's disappointing. This is something that we've been working for years, and it's been almost 2 years since that global day of action, World Says No to War on Yemen, when we brought together 400 organizations from 30 countries and calling on Biden to make good on that campaign promise of stopping U.S. participation in this war. And it's been almost 2 years of us calling on Bernie and his friends to move forward with this vote. I mean, in January of 2021, so almost 2 years ago, Representative Ro Khanna spoke at a public rally online that we had helped organize with Action Corps and the Yemeni Alliance Committee and other organizations. And Ro Khanna said on that call, Senator Sanders and I are introducing the Yemen War Powers resolution to finally stop U.S. participation in this war. It's almost 2 years later, and that vote still hasn't happened.
See the full interview at our website. Evans-Frantz talks about the progress made with some legislators and a personal confrontation he had with Ned Price, the spokesperson for Biden's State Department. At the site SaudiUS.org, we took a harsher line. Bernie, you broke our hearts. Why did he withdraw the resolution? What did Biden offer or threaten? In the meantime, the blockade of Yemen continues. See coverage at SaudiUS.org. COVID cases are rising again. Here's something that could help. The U.S. government is giving away COVID test kits for free. All you have to do is go to their site, covidtests.gov, and give your name and address. It costs absolutely nothing. I went there myself, gave them my name and address. It took 2 minutes. It cost nothing. covidtests.gov. This is a city decked out in finery for Christmas. It's a photo from a year ago in Mariupol, Ukraine. This is what Mariupol looks like now. In France, on December 10th, hundreds, maybe 1,000 people turned out in a demonstration in support of Ukraine. I'll read some from the statement of the organizers as you observe photos of the demonstration. An unprecedented humanitarian crisis threatens the people of Ukraine this winter. The conditions of conflict that have prevailed in eastern Ukraine since 2014 has turned into an all-out high-intensity war since the invasion by Putin's troops on February 24th. This special operation had the explicit goal of overthrowing the Ukrainian government and destroying the Republic of Ukraine as an independent country. The victims number in the tens of thousands, the displaced persons in the millions, and the damage in the tens of billions of euros. A just and lasting peace will not be established without conditions. It can only be envisaged on the basis of the respect of certain elementary principles. The withdrawal of all invading troops from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. The safe return of all refugees and displaced persons. The statement also talks about reparations and prosecutions for crimes against humanity. These are photos from Times Square, New York, of a rally for U.S. railroad workers. Though Biden forced a contract with no sick days onto the railroad workers, the fight still goes on. Biden can still be pressured to give them sick days, which apparently he can do with the stroke of a pen. In related news, workers in the Engineers Union have elected Eddie Hall to replace the longtime president of their national union, who was on the cross-union bargaining team that produced the contract that most railroad workers oppose. It was a huge upset. We had Simon Pirani on the program talking about Ukraine. Here he talks about a false climate solution, so-called green hydrogen.
We're pleased to welcome the author and activist Simon Pirani as the main speaker. Simon is the author of Burning Up, A Global History of Fossil Fuel Consumption, and has written extensively about the future for hydrogen in a sustainable economy. So the first point about hydrogen is that for all this talk about the great hydrogen future, there is no talk in the political sphere about the existing hydrogen industry, which produces a lot of hydrogen and produces an absolutely huge amount of carbon dioxide emissions. If you look at the graph on the left there, the emissions produced by hydrogen production globally are not an awful way behind the amount of emissions produced by aviation. And I'm sure if we did a poll of people who are concerned about climate change, even those who are quite kind of active in protest movements and so on, they would cite aviation as being one of the big problems. But I don't think they would cite hydrogen because it's not in the news and it's hidden. A lot of this. Well, the next slide is about what this hydrogen is used for. But the other point is it's called grey hydrogen. So the process is that you take natural gas, which is CH4, carbon and hydrogen. You take the carbon out and join that up with oxygen. You throw that into the atmosphere. That's called carbon dioxide emissions. And you use your hydrogen for whatever you're going to use it for. And what you can see, that pie chart on the right-hand side, most of this hydrogen is produced from gas, some from coal, and all the so-called green and blue hydrogen, which is all we ever hear about in the news, is represented by that tiny green strip at the top of that pie chart. So that's a situation at the moment. There is an existing hydrogen industry, and again, you could either say it's nearly as much as global aviation in terms of emissions, or it's more than the UK and France put together. It's another way of looking at it. This is what this hydrogen is used for. It's used, the biggest use is in oil refineries for the various processes that go on in those refineries. It's used for ammonia production. That ammonia is mostly used to make fertilizers for agriculture. That's a sort of use you might feel, was more deserved, if you like. So that's a significant use. Methanol production, and as you can see, quite a small amount in steel production, the light blue segment. Now, what about this blue hydrogen and green hydrogen that we hear about? I think just looking at the audience on the call, many of you are probably aware of bits of this, but just to go through it. So you've got that grey hydrogen made from gas mostly, or from coal, and the carbon dioxide is a byproduct. And for every ton of hydrogen, don't forget, if you make it from gas, you get 10 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. I mean, it's a really filthy, dirty process. Now, blue hydrogen is exactly the same, but the idea is that the carbon dioxide will be taken away and stored by a process you've all probably heard of, carbon capture and storage. And you've probably heard of it because for 30 years, oil and gas companies have been trying to make this process work, and they have basically not succeeded. Most of the carbon capture and storage, there's a couple of dozen plants around the world. There's only one freestanding one, I think, that is not related to the oil and gas industry and is working as well as was planned, but there are many more. So more than half the carbon capture and storage that's done currently, the carbon dioxide is then taken by the oil company and pumped back into the reservoir to support the pressure of the oil and gas, which is then produced by that oil and gas company, which is hardly a decarbonization technology. There are several other smaller ways, and I'm not going to go into it. And we could have someone who understands chemistry to go into more details, but there's almost no hydrogen being produced in those other ways. The only other significant way that it's possible to produce hydrogen is by the electrolysis of water. That's so-called green hydrogen, and all these inflated claims that are being made for the hydrogen industry are based on the idea that electricity will be produced by renewables, and then that hydrogen will be available. But the problem is it takes an enormous amount of renewables to produce green hydrogen. It's a very energy intensive process. You actually lose something in the process. So if you put in so many terawatt hours of renewable energy, you get less. The energy that's contained in the hydrogen that comes out of the process is less than what went in from the renewables. And the problem about renewables is that we are relying on them as probably the only really properly non-carbon technology for producing electricity. And whichever way the energy provision goes, and under whatever set of social relations, electricity is definitely going to be part of it in the future. And what this slide shows is that if you've got a kilowatt hour of electricity that's being produced from renewables, the first thing you want to do with it is to knock gas and coal off the electricity grid and close down gas-fired and coal-fired power stations. And if you do that, you can, with 1 kilowatt hour of renewable energy, you can get rid of 2 kilowatt hours of gas and then so much CO2 emissions, or 2.5 or even 3 kilowatt hours of coal. And you can see that there's a graphic representation there of how much CO2 emissions you're then saving. It's a good thing. If you use that same kilowatt hour of renewables to produce hydrogen, and then you replace your gas with that hydrogen, you're getting a much smaller result in terms of saving carbon emissions, as is illustrated by that small grey blob down the bottom. Now, there's a last thing just quickly, and we can go back to this. What we have particularly in Yorkshire, where it is one of the areas that the government wants to use to test this hydrogen stuff out, and they've got this so-called carbon capture, what's it called? Forgotten. Carbon capture sort of hub, which is going to be based in Yorkshire. But one of the things they're saying is that they're going to also bring into that carbon capture project the Drax power station. They're falsely claiming that the Drax power station, because it's being switched over to burn wood rather than gas or coal, they're falsely claiming it as a great environmental victory. It isn't. I mean, obviously plant matter does pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, but if you take the whole process, Drax is not a green power station. They're actually bringing the wood at the moment from Norway in the most environmentally destructive way, spewing out a load of emissions just on the transport. And the organization that has done some terrific research on this is Biofuel Watch, and very, very good to follow their very, very good research on that. And Drax is now saying that it's going to be plugged into this carbon capture and storage, the most ambitious project ever. So far, the tests have shown that the equipment doesn't work as they want it to. And Biofuel Watch's take on this is that Drax's subsidies from the government run out in 2027, and they're trying to find a way of getting them extended. And apparently, just saying that you're going to do something with carbon capture and storage is enough to get you some more subsidies. Okay, so this is the third chunk, looking a bit more closely at what are the possible uses and abuses of hydrogen. So there are things which, if you think as we tackle and confront this crisis, we're going to have an industrial system that looks anything at all like the one we have now. I mean, personally, I continue to hope that society is going to change, the economy is going to change, and we'll have a society and economy that looks very little like the one we have. But if you think it's even going to look a little like it, you're going to have a lot of electricity, and things like steel making, for example, are not going to stop, but they'll be very different and perhaps smaller than they are now. And I mean, I could sit and talk for hours, but Mike would stop me about how you could use less steel in the economy and still everybody could live in perfectly comfortable houses and could do what they need to do and get from place to place and so on and so on and so on. And that's obviously, you know, all that is part of the discussion and the context. And we shouldn't try to discuss a particular technology, hydrogen, outside of the larger context. But if we're going to have an economy that looks anything like the one we have now, we may well want and when I say we, I mean society. I do not mean the government and the capitalist ruling class. We as a society may well want hydrogen, for example, to make steel, because it's got an enormous amount of energy per unit of mass. It's brilliant for storing, and you can burn it at very, very high temperatures. So great for making steel. But it is not great for low temperature heat. And the big use of low temperature heat, of course, is heating homes. And it is also not good for transport fuel. And when I say that, I am merely citing a recent report last month put out by the National Engineering Policy Centre. They are not associated with the labour movement or the environmentalists. They are a very kind of mainstream establishment body of engineers. So they're looking at it from that point of view. And their point of view is you don't use this for home heating or transport. Because to produce it from renewables, you need to use so much renewable electricity, you keep it for what you really need it for. And that might be making steel. What I haven't done, and if anybody on the call knows, I'd be interested to hear, what I haven't done is got an understanding of whether there are other ways of making fertilizers for agriculture, because again, in the society I want, there would not be industrial agriculture on the model we have now, but I'm not sure that nobody would ever need some fertilizers. And I don't know whether it's possible to do those without hydrogen. But the point is, the hydrogen should be saved for what is really important. It should not be used for home heating. It should not be used for transport. And Jan Rosano of the Regulatory Assistance Project, again, is quite kind of in the political mainstream and advises regulatory bodies in Europe as to energy policies. He said, gas industry claims that clean alternatives to hydrogen for home heating are too expensive, too difficult and too disrupted. Those claims are overblown. And believe me, he's using very sort of moderate language there. And in fact, he's the author of a paper that I've referred to on this next slide, and he reviewed 32 academic studies which compared hydrogen for home heating and heat pumps for home heating. And how many of them said heat pumps were more efficient? 32 out of 32. And that's we can find the link and circulate it to people. That was in Joule, which is an academic journal for energy specialists.
Simon,
yep.
I do not want to stop you, but I'll just tell you that you've used 20 minutes so far.
Okay, right.
So, but don't stop. It's so good.
Okay. I'll try to speed through. So, and that's again the National Engineering Policy Centre. The decision on the best use of available low carbon hydrogen needs to be made from a whole system decarbonisation point of view. Again, that's not me saying that. That is mainstream engineers who are working within the establishment. And they've got a diagram there, which again, we'll circulate these slides, shows how heat pumps are 4 times more efficient.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.